In this video, we are going to finish up our book review of Flowers, Feathers, and Animal Friends by Sara Simon. So this week we are going to be working on herbs and a garden gnome. I was looking over the colors that are involved. There's quite a bit of colors, and I'm going to use the colors that I had already pre-mixed when I did all of the color recipes in the first video. So let's get started. This painting does take a little bit longer, but I like how Sara breaks it down into each of the herbs. So she focuses on each of the herbs, starting with basil, and then she moves from sage to thyme to the chives and to rosemary. And then we move to the clay pot, which was a lot of fun to paint, probably my favorite thing to paint on this page. And then we finish with the gnome and then kind of go back and forth to finish up some details in the gnome and the clay pot. For the paintbrush, I'm going to continue to use my Winsor & Newton round 6 brush. It has been working fine for all of these projects. Sara does mention a round 1 and a round 4 throughout the projects. However, I have found that this round 6 has been working great. So let me just adjust my paint over to the right. I am right-handed, so I like to have my paint on the right side of my work, and then we're going to work on the basil first. The first step is to put a clear wash on all of the basil leaves. I'm going to speed up the video from time to time because this did take quite a while and I didn't want the video to be too long. So we begin with the basil, and it asks for a wet on wet dabs of oxide of chromium, olive green, and yellow ochre. And so I just I started with one and then I added the next. And I really like how it gives it some great interest and dimension by using those 3 colors together so that the leaves aren't flat. They really have some nice interest, which is more of a natural leaf anyway, right? They're not usually just one flat color. If you missed the first 2 videos, I did go over a basic introduction of the book, went over the swatches of paint that is used throughout this book, plus the mixing recipes, which are wonderful. I have really enjoyed them. And then last week I did a couple of pages in the book. If you are interested, I will have the link below with my affiliate link with Amazon. The next part says to work into the sage, and it's pretty much the same concept, working from the stem of the sage and then using the eucalyptus green and then going back to the oxide of chromium. It's pretty straightforward. I do like how you have this monochromatic look with all of the greens, but you're still getting some differentiation between each of the different types of herbs. And then we're going to work on the thyme. I think the thyme was probably my favorite one to work on. It just had these little itty bitty leaves that were a lot of fun to work with. Just going in with my burnt sienna on the stems first. And then with each of the thyme leaves, it's a wash of hydrangeas blue, monstera, and sage green. This one probably took the most time because the leaves were so tiny and I had to spread out all three of those different green colors. But it was a lot of fun to paint. And then going into the chives, it asks for the eucalyptus green again, the oxide of chromium again, and the monstera. And just making each of those a different shade of that. Again, pretty simple and straightforward, but it was a lot of fun. I think I had better water control over this watercolor painting. If you recall in video 2, I talked about the water control a lot. I think with this, I was able to control that a little bit better. Maybe because each of the little leaves are smaller. But I think I had better success this week. I did have to dab some of the leaves here and there, but overall it was good water control. So moving into the rosemary, it was burnt sienna along the stem and then just a wash of olive green, leaf green, and sage green. Again, I'm kind of repeating myself, but I really did like the variation of greens that we were using throughout the herbs. I think it gave it a lot of great interest. So then we move into the pot and it asks for a wash at the bottom and then to move your way up to the top. So just dabbing in some burnt sienna around the boundary is what it called for. And then just continuing to add that burnt sienna as you work your way up. Working on the plant pot was a lot of fun. But again, it went back to that water control. And I feel like I had better water control with this. But it was going back and forth between a nice saturation of color and then having a nice wet brush for those highlights. Because you don't want, you want the highlights to remain intact, but by making those other places more saturated in color. So you're kind of going back and forth between a damp brush to keep those highlighted areas and a very saturated brush to keep those darker areas to create a nice shape for your pot. So the next step is to go into the garden gnome. I really liked how Sara gave step-by-step instructions on how to create the gnome look. It started with just a single wash on the gnome's hat with burnt rose, and then a wet on wet with the chocolate brown on his boots. And they're darker at the top and then they get lighter at the bottom. So you kind of create a wash from the top of the boot to the bottom. And then for the gnome's coat, it's the same thing. It's a wet on wet technique with that moody blue, starting at the top and working your way down with a nice wash. So darker at the top and then it will end up lighter at the bottom. It was nice that I already had all of these paints pre-mixed. So I already had a lot of the lighter colors mixed as well. So I was able to go over the gnome's face with the color light. While the gnome's face was drying, Sara took us back over to the potted plants so we could add the chocolate brown to the base of the herbs so that it looked like dirt inside the pot, and just adding a few more saturations of color, giving it more interest and shape as well. Once the gnome's face was dry, then I took the warm buff and I added it to the gnome's beard. I used rose to add some color to the gnome's lips, his cheeks, and his forehead, the bridge of his nose. It added nice dimension. Then for the belt, adding the yellow ochre throughout and then the chocolate brown to add in some highlights. And then repeat the yellow ochre on the gnome's pants. And then last but not least, now that the boots are dry, going back in and adding that chocolate brown, adding it to the sole of the boots, and we are finished. So like I said, this one took a little bit longer, but it was still that step-by-step process, just working each individual sections and kind of going back and forth there at the end to tie everything together. I think her instructions were great. So I would highly recommend this book, especially if you're learning watercolor for the first time. I think my favorite part of this was definitely the working on the terracotta pot. But now we finished all 3 paintings. Really happy with the results. I did complete a few of the other ones. I did the lemons and the monarch caterpillars. Loved the yellow and the light green. I also worked on the magnolia and the dragonflies, and the butterflies and the geraniums. So my overall takeaway from this book is that it's a great way to start watercolor without having to worry about drawing anything out. You have everything drawn out for you. It's on watercolor paper, which is a bonus. I learned a lot about water control, and my last highlight was the color recipes. Just being able, I love color theory and how you can mix colors together to get, new colors. I mean, there's endless possibilities. So go grab yourself a copy and have fun with it and learn and grow in your watercolor skills. Watch the next video where I will be sharing some insights in my studio with my studio vlog. Until next time, bye.